Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Explore Techniques to Speed Up Web Application Development with IDE Plugins. It's a quick 30 minutes spills and series with 15 to 20 minutes. We'll go through the IDE plugins and then followed by 10 minutes Q&A, hosted by Sencha. My name is Raj Villero. I'm a marketing manager at Sencha. Will be moderating today's webinar. I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter, Mark Gusmano. Before I hand the mic over to Mark to kick off the webinar, I would like to take a moment to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on demand on the YouTube channel. Thank you, Mark. Now you have the floor.
All right, great. Welcome, everyone. And today, as we said, we're going to be discussing the IDE plugins. And if you haven't already, if you could respond to the poll we have out there, which plugin do you use or are you interested in? It's running currently. We got almost 80% voting. And just an FYI, Visual Studio Code leads the pack at about 60%, followed by Visual Studio at 20, JetBrains at 13, and Eclipse at 7, which is kind of what I expected, but I just wanted to get a sense from all of you. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to do about 15 or 20 minutes of mostly demo. Then we'll have ample time for questions, see what questions you guys have. If you have questions as we're going, go ahead and type them in, and we'll address them at the end. So I first want to go through which plugins are available, what the current status is of each of the plugins, and then we're going to specifically talk a little bit about the JetBrains plugin because there's been some discussion about that recently. Then I will point all of you to the documentation. Where do you learn how to install, how to use, what features are available in each of the plugins? And then I will run right into a demonstration of one of the plugins, the extension for Visual Studio Code. Again, it's the most popular, certainly by this poll, and it's the one that I use the most. So I think that would be appropriate. So the available plugins. We just, in the 7.7 release of EXTJS, upgraded most of these plugins. The Visual Studio plugin was not upgraded. It is supporting what it had supported previously, Visual Studio 2013, 2015, or 2017. This is the Microsoft Visual Studio plugin, not the Visual Studio Code plugin that is freely downloadable and available as a JavaScript-based plugin. So Visual Studio is out there. The Eclipse plugin was upgraded to the latest Eclipse at the time of the upgrade, and you can see there what versions it supports. JetBrains is also upgraded and currently supports JetBrains 2023.1, which was the latest when we upgraded. There has been a new version, 2023.2, that exposed some issues, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then finally, Visual Studio Code with its current version of 1.0.4, which by my definition supports the latest version of Visual Studio Code. What I did this morning is I went and made sure my Visual Studio Code was updated to the latest, which is, as you see on the right-hand side here, 1.80.2, and that's what I'm running the demo on. So it runs and is successful on the latest version. As I said, the JetBrains plugin exposed some issues as the new version 2023.2 came out. We are aware of that. We are working on that and also working on some code completion issues. So the currently supported versions of the JetBrains plugins as advertised, 2023.1 is what it officially supports. As I said, we're working on the issues around 2023.2, but if you want to use the JetBrains plugin, just be aware of that. So let's jump in. The first thing I want to do is talk about where the documentation is, how you get the product, what features are available, and it's all available on the docs site at docs.sencha.com. And I'm going to go ahead and bring in the docs site. So if you go to the IDE plugins, you can see that all of the supported plugins are documented. Eclipse, JetBrains, Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code. And for each of these, the first section talks about installation. So most of the time you would go to our support portal, support.sencha.com, download the plugin, and then follow the installation in the documentation here. So if there's a marketplace for the particular plugin, like the Eclipse IDE as a marketplace, you can also download it there. Visual Studio Code, for example, you can download either from the support portal or from the marketplace for Visual Studio Code. So each of these has their own documentation for both installation and acquiring a license for the plugin itself. The other parts of the documentation talk about features and capabilities. And as I said, I'm going to use my time here to walk you through the features and capabilities of one of the plugins, the plugin for Visual Studio Code. So looking at the documentation here, it talks about installation. It talks about what you need to be able to use some of the features. The plugins basically are efficiency capabilities for things that in a lot of cases are done by Sencha command. So one of the prerequisites is to have the Sencha command installed in your environment. The easiest way to install it, again, is to go to the support portal, download Sencha command. If you're a trial customer, you will get a version of Sencha command with the trial. So either way that you want to go through that. If you do install from the support portal for Visual Studio Code, you're going to download the plugin, and it's essentially a file that has a VSIX extension. So you bring that file down to your hard drive. Within Visual Studio Code, you will be able to install the VSIX from the file system. So let's take a quick look at what I'm talking about there. So here is Visual Studio Code open with an empty project or no project at all. And on the left-hand side here in my environment, I have an extensions tab. This extensions tab shows me all of the extensions that are installed in Visual Studio Code. So plugin is roughly equivalent to extension in the Visual Studio Code world. If I have a file that I want to install, in this top right menu here, there's an install from VSIX. So this merely brings you to the file system, you pick your file, it will install it, and once you install, you will get an entry for that particular plugin or extension. Here's the plugin for Sencha EXTJS. You'll notice that is installed globally, ready to go, and I now can start using the capabilities of that component. So let's take a look at some of those capabilities, and they apply across the plugins. So we're going to have roughly the same type of functionality within each of the respective IDEs. So let's go past here to features. And here are several of the features that we're going to take a look at. We're going to take a look at IntelliSense or code completion capabilities. We'll take a look at how you can navigate to the documentation or to the SDK for particular classes that you're using. We will look at various ways to do code generation within your EXTJS application. We'll talk about how you integrate or how the plugin integrates with Sencha command, so you don't have to remember all the parameters for Sencha App Watch or Sencha App Generate. It will all generate for you by asking you a couple of questions. There's a little bit about debugging EXTJS apps, which are essentially JavaScript apps, so a lot of commonality there with just regular JavaScript apps. And then a little bit on some of the configuration capabilities. So the first thing I actually want to show you is some of this integration with Sencha command. I think that's a good place to start because we want to create a new project and then use it within the environment here. So I have the EXTJS plugin, the EXTJS plugin installed. And one of the things you can do in Visual Studio Code is do a Shift Command key or go up to the command menu to look for the commands that are available. And the plugin installed several EXTJS commands. So if I type EXTJS as keywords, you can see the things that I can do within the environment because the plugin or extension is installed. So I can create a new EXTJS application. I have a reference to be able to edit snippets. There's some IntelliSense configuration I can deal with, and I can enable or disable IntelliSense. But we're going to start, as you would probably start, in creating a new EXTJS application. So as you can see here, it's asking me for the name of the project. So I'll see Mark project, whatever you might want to call it. If I hit enter, it's going to suggest a location for that project that it's going to create. I'm fine with Mark project. I'll hit enter again. It will also suggest or recommend the version of the framework you want to use. I'm currently using 7.6. 7.7 just recently came out. You can use that. If I hit enter, it'll ask me the next question, which is which toolkit do I want to use, whether it be the classic toolkit or the modern toolkit, or maybe I want to mix both. I'm going to pick classic. And then finally, which theme do I want to use? In this case, I'll pick theme material. So by picking all those things, I basically figured out the parameters that Sencha generate app needs to generate an app. But I didn't have to memorize all of those capabilities. So what's happening here is Sencha command, the command line tool, is running in the background. And as you can see here by the messages, it's generating the application. It finishes, and then the plugin says, well, I'm done here. Would you like to open that project now? Which is nice, because then I don't have to look for it. I'll say yes. And here I am in the Sencha command, or in the application. And you'll notice here in the bottom here, this EXTJS indexed, and it's processing. So what happens is we're indexing your application so we can find things, so that we can click on perhaps one of your classes and go to that class through a link. All of that's being done one time for the whole project as an index. And then as you are making changes, the index will maintain and be the latest and greatest. So you can see here it's already done, and we're completed here. One of the things that tells, or the main thing that tells the plugin that this is an EXTJS application, is the presence of this .sencha file. So if you're not getting IntelliSense to work, or if you're not seeing the things I'm showing you, it may be that this .sencha file is not available. So we've got a project, we've got an application, it's up and running. Probably the next thing I'd want to do is run it to actually see it working. I can always go back to that menu that I was showing you initially, or now that I have a Sencha project, I can merely right click and say run Sencha app watch. So now app watch against Sencha command is running. It figures out where it is for me. It knows that I'm going to run a local server, in this case at port 1841. And in a moment here, it'll say ready or waiting. So here's waiting for changes. If I go over here to port 1841 and I refresh the browser, there's my starter EXTJS application. So integration with Sencha command makes it a lot easier to run without having to memorize the Sencha commands. One last thing that we'll do at this moment is we'll go ahead and stop app watch. So this will run continuously as I make changes. It'll continue to update. But when I'm all finished, or if I don't want an instance of app watch running, I just simply click stop app watch, and I'm good to go. All right, let's go back to the project, and let's look at a couple of the capabilities. If I go back to the documentation, let me do that real quick here. And let's scroll down a little bit and look at some of the other features. So code completion is one feature, which lets me type in EXTJS code and it will give me EXTJS suggestions. So for example, if I go over here to app view main. This is the main view of my application. I go down here to the items collection. Let's say I wanted to add a new item. So I would add a new item by creating an X type. And if I hit colon and then I start typing an X type, you'll notice here that there are EXTJS X types being suggested. So I can pick a panel, picker field, you get the idea. So all of these are part of the extensive IntelliSense capabilities where, depending on where you are in your code, the plugin will know what to suggest for you. I'm gonna go ahead and delete that just so we keep things clean and show you the next capability, which is code navigation. So for code navigation, as an example, I can go up here to this ext tab panel extend class. If I right click and say go to definition, you'll notice that I go right into the EXTJS SDK source code to the definition for tab panel. So if I need to look at tab panel, if I want to see what it's doing from a code point of view, I can do that. I can also peek at that definition, which is a nice feature of Visual Studio Code. I'm just giving me a little box here with the contents of, again, the EXT tab panel. If I hit F1 while I'm on that tab panel, it'll bring me right to the documentation for the tab panel. So a few code and documentation navigation capabilities. Scrolling down a little bit more, we've talked about documentation lookup. Code generation is a big part of the application. So if I go, again, I go back to the app, let's say I'm in this folder and I want to create a new view. We'll call it mark view.js. And by default, it's going to be blank, of course. But if I type ext, you notice I have some templates that I can create. So one template here is this EXTJS class. Another one is the EXTJS view. I'll just pick class for the sake of it. All of that is from a template that you can actually extend if you want to. So if I go back to the list of EXTJS commands, notice that I can edit EXTJS snippets. So all the default snippets are here. So for example, the default class snippet is right here. Notice I created a user snippet where I added these comment lines right here. And there's some replaceable variables. So the reason mine looks like this with these three comments and these filled in is because of this particular template. So you can upgrade, enhance any of the templates that are out there. And as you saw, you can do classes, controllers, models, stores, views, view controllers, view models, basically all of the main class types that exist. Okay. Code completion, code navigation, we've talked about that already, going to a definition, documentation lookup, and then we've already discussed the code generation and the creation of an application with such a command under the covers. So there are a few other things that you can do. If I just really quickly go over those again, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the palette, type EXTJS. We've talked about the snippets and app. I can, if there's some issue going on and I want to see the log of what happened, I can go directly to the plugin log file. For IntelliSense, I can customize how IntelliSense works, and this is the configuration for that. If I want to see my license file, maybe I have a new offline license file I want to copy, this will show you the location. That indexing that I showed you at the beginning, I can re-index the app if for whatever reason I need to do that. I can turn on and turn off IntelliSense for the project. I can create not only apps, but I can create packages, Sencha packages, or an entire workspace. So that really quickly is the functionality and features of the EXTJS Visual Studio Code plugin. With that, I will send it back and see if we have some questions, and we'll go ahead and answer those.
All right, Mark, thank you for the
Yeah,
presentation.
absolutely.
Just one question here, where I can find the documentation for IDE plugins?
The documentation itself, as I said, is right in, the easiest way to find it is docs. Just type docs.sencha.com. And when you do that, you're going to see the documentation for all of our products. If you scroll down to the bottom here, here's the IDE plugin documentation, and this is where we started. So pretty easy to find it, docs.sencha.com, and then look for the plugins.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a question with regards, I don't know it's a comprehensive or not, but yeah, the question is, does it work with Rapid EXTJS plugin as well?
Very good question. Very good question. The context of the question is that we've introduced a product that we are building, a new product called Rapid EXTJS. It's currently in beta, but we're working on the general availability version. Rapid XJS is also a Visual Studio Code plugin. It has a slightly different purpose. It's actually to enable visual drag and drop type development, very similar to what Sencha Architect currently does. So at the moment, we will have two plugins. If you didn't notice, if I go to my installed extensions, I actually have both Visual Studio plugin and an instance of the Rapid EXTJS beta. So it's going to enhance or extend the functionality of what the current plugin does. I would imagine someday in the future we'll meld those two into one product. But at the moment, they're two plugins. They work together, and you are able to get at the beta just by typing, go over to sencha.com. And if you notice right at the top of the sencha.com page, there is a link to the Rapid EXTJS beta page. So if you want to learn more about that, or click over here at Rapid XJS, it'll give you some details on that. So very good question. Look forward to that later this year, probably.
That's great. Thank you, Mark. We do have a question here. Is the license for extension is separate from Sencha license?
Yes, when you purchase a license for the EXTJS product, it will include a license that will apply to the plugin. So if you notice here that the IDE plugins right there are part of both the Enterprise and the Pro versions. So you get the IDE plugins for whatever you purchase, and you will get a license key. I didn't go through the UI for the licensing, but it's documented. If you go look at the plugin up on the top here, it talks about how you actually install the license. So you're going to get a little dialogue that says it requires activation. If you have a license, you're just going to click activate license, and it will walk you through that. It's pretty straightforward.
Wonderful. I know we did run a poll at the beginning. I think we do have some results. Do you want to make an announcement, Mark, on that?
Yeah, we have some updated results. It looks like, again, Visual Studio Code is in the lead. It currently is 69%. We'll call it 70%. JetBrains at 15% and Visual Studio at 12 are kind of semi-tied. And then Eclipse at about 4%. So certainly by and large, which is what we expected, Visual Studio Code is the most used. And that's frankly one of the reasons we chose as our first implementation of Rapid XJS to do that as a Visual Studio Code extension, just because of that, the popularity. As I said, it's the editor that I tend to use quite a bit, so I'm used to it.
Wonderful. I'm not sure this is a question related context or not, but yeah, we do have one general question, which is what is the difference between app app versus package?
Good question. So an app in the context of Sencha command, when you generate an app, you are generating the entirety that I showed you. It's the starting page, it's all the pages that are part of it. It's the ability to take that whole thing and bring it to a production server and run it. What a Sencha package is, it's a kind of a reusable component approach. So we use packages to, for example, provide our enterprise components, chart, pivot grid. We put those in Sencha packages so that they're modular. You can just kind of click them into an EXTJS application. We also provide that capability for you to do that for your application. So let's just say you want to build a package that's reusable across several projects. You can do that by generating a Sencha package. It's a little confusing because we use the word package, we've used it for a while. There are also things called NPM packages, which are more global JavaScript package libraries. We'll talk about how you can use NPM packages in a couple of weeks. I'll be returning in a couple of weeks to talk about our open tools, our XGen product, and in that case, we'll talk about NPM packages. And you can use both NPM packages and Sencha packages, but that's essentially what packages are in the context of EXTJS.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. It seems like we have answered all the questions asked at this time.
Great.
We do have another exciting series coming next week, which is on Wednesday, 9th. The topic is learn how to build cross-platform HTML applications using Sencha Architect, hosted by our pre-sales expert, Andres. Right. I would like to remind everyone today's webinar was recorded and you will be receiving a follow-up email with the link to the recording shortly. Once again, thank you for attending today's webinar. We look forward to having you join us next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.